Hi.
Peter.
Hi, Cheryl. How are you doing?
You're on mute.
Oh, I'm not on mute. How weird is that? How weird is that? Let me try something else.
Unless I'm missing something, maybe. Just make sure my volume's up. I've done that before. Let me see. Are you still muted?
Can you hear me now?
I still can't hear you.
Still can't hear me. How weird is that? Right, hold on a second.
I'll make sure it's not me.
Let me just check then. Hello, hello. Yeah, on my end, it says it's working fine.
Why can't I hear you? It's not working. Might be my end, but I'm not hearing you.
So I'm gonna.
If I don't hear Audrey when she gets here, I'll know it's me.
Audrey
says that she can hear you, then I won't concern you. It'd be something to do with my laptop. I usually use a different system, but I'm connected to my laptop, so
I've just changed my microphone. Can you hear me? Hello?
I've got Philip texting me.
Christian?
Okay.
Oh, Kaleem, sorry, I'm just about to start a lecture, Kaleem. Can you email me? I'm so sorry. Okay, okay. I'm literally just about to start a lecture, so I'm going to try and send you this message. Can I send it in WhatsApp? Okay, it's a quote. It's a quote for an article. I'm sure you'll be happy with it, but I just want to check that you are before we send it, yeah? Okay then, bye Kaleem. Thanks, bye.
Sorted.
Sorted?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly. It was me. I knew it was me. And
that's all right.
Something, because I'm using my laptop to do the Zoom for the first time, there was some setting that I needed to unmute. So
don't worry.
Technology, love it.
Yeah.
Great. So we're now at 18, Peter.
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah,
right.
We're at 18.
Well, I think we should do it.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And I sent out another broadcast with a little clip from your Twitter account.
All right.
That boosted things a little bit.
Very good.
But as I say, we'll send out the recording and perhaps put a little intro about the fact that you're meeting when you're happy for me to say that. Let me know, and I'll send out the recording to the membership. And quite often people do watch it post events. So
well, when I can tell you, there will be a press release as well. So it'll be a sort of pre-COP Prince's kind of cities. Ending climate change begins in cities is the message basically.
Okay, excellent. Well, when you're happy, let me see. Any press release, and I'll take a snippet from it and send out the recording. That'd be fab.
I'll make sure that you're copied in, Cheryl.
Thanks very much, Peter. Okay, do you want to test your screen share?
Yeah, I'll do that right now.
And we'll
make sure I've been given permission. I can do that.
You can. And then just check moving through your slides.
So how about that? Can you see that?
That's perfect. Yeah. And that's great. You're moving through them. That's perfect.
So I'll stop there.
Great. Okay, well, that's sorted that, and we have plenty of time. So do you want me to
8 minutes.
The waiting room off and when people start arriving, because we try to keep these fairly informal and let people kind of
I'm very happy for you to
do. Now we know that the technology is working.
Yeah.
To worry about.
So have you got people in the waiting room now?
Not at the moment, but
No.
sometimes they do start joining. So
yeah,
I could just disable the waiting room now, and then
as you wish. I'm all yours.
We'll start. Yeah. Oh, in terms of intro.
Yeah.
I'll try and make sure people, every now and then they become unmuted, and sometimes you get some background noise. So I'll try and keep an eye on that. Okay. And in terms of an intro, are you happy to just, say your own intro?
I'm happy to introduce myself. Don't worry.
Yeah, is that okay? That's great.
Fine.
Brilliant. Well, we have one guest. We'll wait till there's a couple, otherwise it's
gets a little embarrassing.
A bit awkward. Yeah. Exactly. So you're very busy.
I'm afraid I'm frantically busy, and my wife's just had an accident, unfortunately. So she's coming back from overseas this evening. So I'm going to go and pick her up from the airport once this is over. Yeah.
Oh dear, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Gosh.
No, she fell and broke her knee basically. So it's
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
When did you find that out? Today?
No, she left on Friday. She fell on Saturday, and she's coming back today, having had an operation. So it's not been much of a vacation.
Wow. Well, thank you for doing this evening even more.
No, not a problem at all.
Gosh, I'm really sorry to hear that.
Thanks, Cheryl. And let me also apologize for not being a very good member. I'm partly doing this as a penance.
What's wrong with what do you mean? You're not a bad member?
I am a bad member.
There's no such thing.
I pay my dues and that's it, and it's not good enough. But I'm just spread so thin. I can't.
Oh, it's the sort of organisation that you really have to dip in and out as you can. So thank you very much for doing this evening. So good of you. But as you say, it is very topical, so it's brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where are we now? 5 minutes. Only one's waiting.
Yeah, well, you say 18 are coming, but it could end up being 3.
Oh, I don't think so. I think because they've signed up, so fairly late today. Some of them, yeah. I think. Sometimes I think people sign up too soon, and then they forget. Because often, because I do quite regular broadcasts with saying the same events, and then when things happen, they obviously fall off. But people sign up sometimes several times because they know they want to attend and they forget they've registered and then they register again. So you have to, make sure you're not counting people twice.
And are you having live events now? Have you started?
Yeah, well, we're going to have, you might be interested in coming to the Leather Sellers. It's quite hard to say that. The Master's Reception on the 24th of November is a live one. And that's quite exciting because that hall is not normally open to other livery companies. So do you know Jo Bacon?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, well, she is, her husband is the new master leather seller.
Oh, right, how funny.
And so as a kind of favour, if you like, they offered, the use of the venue. And it's quite exciting. And we've got Eric Parry coming to do a talk because obviously he did the refurbishment on that. So yeah, it should be a good one. So keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Oh, Audrey's here. Let's get Audrey in. Oh, what's happening with my mouse? Admit Audrey first. There we go. Yeah, so that one should be good. And we've got the carol things and we've got something. So if you are available,
that sounds great.
Hi, Cheryl. Hi, Peter.
Hello, Audrey.
Hello.
Hi. I'm fine. How are you both?
Yeah, good. Thanks. Yeah.
Okay.
How are you, Audrey?
Thanks.
Are you well?
I'm okay. Just a bit
busy.
Fraught. Busy.
Yeah, we're just having that conversation. Peter's fairly fraught as well, and
yes.
His poor wife's had an accident and he's off to get her to the airport after this. So it's really good of him to still go ahead tonight. So
Peter, I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you. But like we said, the show must go on. So
well, that's really, really good of you to do that. So
Nothing serious, I hope. Oh.
Well, unfortunately, it is a bit serious. She's broken the patella on her knee in several places. Yeah, so it's not good. But
it's not good. Did she fall down?
She just slipped in a swimming pool, and that was it.
Oh.
And she just fell right on her knee, and it took the full weight and just basically smashed.
Goodness me.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
She was on holiday. Yeah.
She was on holiday with my stepdaughter. Yeah.
Oh.
Goodness me.
Exactly.
Sorry to hear that.
No.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Wow.
But looking forward to this. However many we have.
Well, we've got 2 in the waiting room now. We've checked the screen share. That's working okay, Audrey.
Okay, great.
And Peter's just going to introduce himself. I said we like to keep these things fairly informal. So
yes.
And
when you say I'm going to introduce myself, are you going to say something by way of introduction at all or not?
Audrey, do you want to say that anything?
No,
about
I think Peter is a heavyweight, so in the industry and profession, so I think
I'm afraid I am a heavyweight, Audrey, but not in the way that you're meaning.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Peter, I'm also very heavyweight.
I tend to mute myself as soon as it starts because I have 2 dogs and I never know when they're going to kick off. So
Audrey, when you let people in, it's basically going to be me. It's going to be the Peter Oborne show, is it?
It is. All right. It is. Yes.
And tell me, it's now 2 minutes to 6. Shall we play it by ear and see how many join? I'll then make the presentation. If anybody's still left at the end and there wants to be a discussion, I'm happy to have a discussion. If not, then we'll just kind of end it when it ends. If that's, will you come onto the screen after the session?
No, we'll end it when it ends.
We'll do a Q&A. That's how it usually goes.
Okay.
And then, and then there's a fairly nice kind of open discussion rather than a Q&A.
Okay.
And then when it feels natural, we'll just say goodnight and
But you'll come onto the screen then, will you?
Well, I can come back in and say, if there's no other questions. Then thanks for coming, and we'll let you all get on with your evening. And I said to Peter that when he has his press release ready after he's met with HRH Prince Charles, he's going to let me see a copy, and then I can release the recording with a little snippet from the press release.
That would be great.
Some videos as well. Coming from the event.
That'd be great.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. Well, I make it 6 o'clock, so I'm going to admit people and take the waiting room off. Okay.
Right. Okay.
So have a great presentation, Peter.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello. Hello to Thomas Saunders and Peter Hopkins.
Hello.
Thank you for joining. I'm going to just give a couple more minutes in case anyone joins us. I think it may be a small turnout tonight, but I'm going to plow on regardless, if that's all right.
Sure. I've taken the waiting room off, Peter, so people can just come in. A few minutes after it starts. So please just, kick off when you feel like you.
Okay. All right. So, I mean, before I do start, as we only have 2 people in the audience, I thought I might ask Peter and Thomas, if it is Peter and Thomas. And Chris as well. Hello, Chris.
Hiya. How are you?
Hi. I'm good. I'm told this is quite informal, so I was just sort of. And Andy as well. Oh my goodness. It's not quantity, it's quality.
There will be some quantity as well.
I'm sure there will. Yeah, I was going to ask what drew people to attend the event, but I think now that there are more people joining, I should probably just get on with it, and we can come back to a discussion at the end if that's all right. So I'm gonna kick off by quickly introducing myself and thanking the WCCA for allowing me to present tonight. My name is Peter Oborne, for those that don't know me. I'm an architect. I used to be a vice president along with Chris at the RIBA some years ago, where I chaired, amongst other things, the International Committee and the Commission for Ethics and Sustainable Development in the Profession. I have another role, which is at UN Habitat. I'm a member of the Stakeholders Advisory Group. And really tonight, I'm here in the capacity of my role as a Senior Vice President at the Commonwealth Association of Architects. And what I'd like to speak about this evening is in advance of COP. And I've just seen the message that the Queen is not going to COP, which is a great disappointment. In advance of COP, I just wanted to share with you some of the work that we've been doing in the Commonwealth and in the Commonwealth Association of Architects around the issue of sustainable urbanization, which, as you'll hear, is an issue of major concern to us and should be to all of us, insofar as you'll be aware, I'm sure, that 70% of carbon emissions are attributable to cities. And 50% of the projected growth in cities to 2050 is projected to come from the Commonwealth. So it is a major issue going forwards. And I'm going to, at that point, start my presentation. And before I do that, I'll share my screen and hope that you can see this slide. So I want to situate this presentation really quite firmly in the decade of action, which, as you probably know, began last year. And ends in 30, by which time, the aspiration is that we will have met all of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm not going to tell you about the Sustainable Development Goals because I'm sure you're very familiar with them, but the important thing to note about the Sustainable Development Goals is the fact that they are interdependent and indivisible and applicable to all nations. And the significance of them really from our perspective as built environment professionals is that, according to this work from Leiden University, SDG 11, to make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, is the only goal which links with all the others. Now, as architects, of course, that wouldn't be a surprise to us, but surprisingly, a lot of people don't perhaps yet still understand the significance of cities in the context of prosperity, health, and well-being, and such like. And this slide from UN Habitat illustrates the fact that 65% of the targets underpinning the 17 goals find their root in some way back to urban and territorial development. So our role as built environment professionals is terribly important in this context. And as I mentioned a minute ago, with 70% of global carbon emissions attributable to cities, whether that be buildings or transportation, clearly we have an enormously important role to play in the agenda before us. And the agenda before us includes not only dealing with the emissions that we're currently generating, but also thinking forwards to the growth that's going to be taking place in the next 30 years. And here you see the projection from UN Habitat, 2.5 billion more people living in cities by 2050. So that's 2.5 billion more people in the next 30 years. It's a staggering number. And COVID may have dampened that to some extent, but it won't have dampened it a lot. And when we look at those next 30 years from the perspective of the Commonwealth, the sobering fact is that, and I think not many of us really appreciated this until recently, but nearly 50% of that growth is forecast to be coming from Commonwealth countries. So that's 1 billion more people in Commonwealth cities in the next 30 years, with 95% of that growth taking place in Asia and Africa. And this is a particular issue for secondary cities. I mean, much of our attention is focused on the larger cities that we're all familiar with. But of course, most of that growth is actually taking place in the 4,000 or so secondary cities, which many of us will never have heard of and probably never visit. So half of all the urban dwellers in the Commonwealth live in those secondary cities, which are urbanizing at just the same rate as their larger counterparts. So you can think of this as a bit like an iceberg, with kind of most of the growth that we're referring to kind of taking place out of sight below the horizon. And when we talk about growth, just to get a sense of the scale of the growth that is being projected, here are some figures from the International Energy Agency, who calculate that by 2060, that's the next 40 years, there will be 90 billion square meters of further additional accommodation in Africa alone. And you can see the projections for the other countries as well. And if you add up all the blue bars on the right and compare them to all the orange bars on the left, you'll see that we're forecast to be building more in the next 40 years than we have in practically all of human history. So I go back to my point, we have to deal with the issues that we're facing here in the global north, but there's an enormous battle ahead in making sure that that growth that we're looking at there is delivered in a sustainable manner. And unfortunately, the issue is compounded by the fact that much of that growth is going to be taking place, as I said, in Asia and Africa, which are among the most vulnerable continents to climate change impacts. So there is an issue of resilience, which is also very, very important. 40% of the world's population live in coastal cities. So again, one can only imagine what the consequences might be. This slide, which again is probably impossible to read, but it's really the shape of it that matters, shows all of the Commonwealth countries ordered by CO2 emissions and gross national income. And unfortunately, what it shows is that historically, as cities have developed, perhaps unsurprisingly, so have carbon emissions. So if you could read the slide, you'd see that all the cities, or most of the cities, or many of the cities in the developed north are in the top, and the majority of cities in the global south are at the bottom. And the consequence of that is, of course, that urbanization historically has been linked with carbon emissions, but we certainly can't afford to repeat that pattern going forwards. This is a slide showing the same cities in the same order with the same CO2 current rates of emission, but overlaid with rates of urbanization. So you can see that in many countries of the global south, there are very high rates of urbanization projected. And if I just read one from that list, Uganda, which I'll come back to shortly, is urbanizing currently at over 6% per annum. So the question here is, how can we ensure that that growth takes place in a sustainable way? Because the half of the pollution, which is half of the CO2 emissions that are currently being emitted by Commonwealth countries, are coming from 250 million people, most of us in the global north. The other half of the CO2 emissions that are currently being generated are coming from 2.25 billion people that are living in the global south. So again, yes, we have to put our own house in order as a priority, but also if we don't make sure that this growth in the global south is delivered in a sustainable way, then everything we'll be doing is for nothing. So it was against this backdrop that the Commonwealth Association of Architects came together with its colleagues in the engineering, planning and surveying professions to undertake a survey of their membership to kind of get a sense of how well prepared we were as a constituency to engage with the nature and the scale of the challenges that we're facing. And we had a lot of input from a lot of other partners, and we had financial support from the Commonwealth Secretariat and from the Prince of Wales Charitable Foundation. We had a good response from a wide variety of countries in each of the 5 regions of the Commonwealth. And important to say here, and again, you won't be able to read this slide, but it's really the sort of the pattern of the slide that matters. It's important to note here that not all of the professions are represented in every Commonwealth country. So as we move from right to left on this slide, there's architectural institutes have a fairly good representation. Engineering institutes perhaps even better represented, unsurprisingly, but a remarkable number of Commonwealth countries don't have any formal planning profession or formal planning institute, and even fewer have formal surveying institutes. So although I'm going to be reporting back the findings of the survey in a second, bear in mind that it doesn't reflect those countries that don't have professional institutes. And when we looked at the findings from our survey, I'm going to give you the 3 key findings. So the first finding was really around the ratio of architects per 1,000 head of population. Itself a fairly meaningless statistic, but gives you a kind of just a crude measure of how well resourced the profession is in each of these countries. And if we look at the countries in the global north and in OECD countries, that ratio is about 0.45 architects per 1,000 head of population. Again, a fairly random and arbitrary measure. But if we look at the countries in the global south, we're talking here about 3 decimal places, and I'll come back to that in a second. The significance is when we then look at the same set of countries in the same order set against rates of urbanization. And this really for me is the killer slide, and it's the slide which I think kind of made my heart palpitate when we actually produced the results, because what you see here is the ratio of architects per 1,000 head of population overlaid with the rates of urbanization. And I mentioned Uganda earlier, so you can see Uganda second from the bottom here on this slide. And in Uganda, urbanization rates compared with 2017 have gone up from 5.3% to 6.2%. But here we're talking about a country of 45 million people, not far short of the UK, with 200 architects, most of whom are based in Kampala. So I make the point again about secondary cities, very little provision in the secondary cities. In terms of planning is an extremely young profession in Uganda, and there are barely 100 planners in the whole country, and most of those in private practice. So, you know, how can we possibly ensure that Uganda, urbanizing at such a rate, are already facing huge levels of informality and inequality and vulnerability, is going to continue to urbanize in a sustainable manner? And here we see that 0.45 percentage, you know, the capacity is simply not there. And it's the same story for the other disciplines. It's actually worse for planning, because planning is relatively underrepresented, as I mentioned earlier, in many of the countries that we're talking about. So how can we talk about sustainable urbanization when we don't have planners? And much of the planning that is being done by architects or engineers, many of whom don't have any formal training in the discipline. But even those professionals that we do have, we all know in this country about the importance of continuing professional development. In our respondent countries, around 40% of architects and planners, planning institutes, said that they don't require any form of mandatory continuing professional development. So we know we have an issue here in the UK with things like climate literacy. How can we expect our colleagues in the global south to also have acquire those skills unless we provide continuing professional development? So when we think about how we might ourselves help to address these issues, I'd suggest that this is one avenue of opportunity for us to help support our colleagues overseas. And then the third issue is around built environment policy. So in this slide, you'll see that 30% of our respondents said that their planning policy wasn't fit for purpose. And 60% said even if it was fit for purpose, it wasn't being implemented effectively. In terms of building codes, nearly 50% said it wasn't fit for purpose. And nearly 70% said it wasn't being implemented effectively. So again, I just ask you to reflect on the kind of the build-up of this picture of lack of capacity, lack of educational capacity. I forgot to mention that, but there's a corresponding lack of educational capacity in many of these countries as well to grow the profession fast enough to make up for this lack, even if that was the solution, which of course it isn't. And when we look at the continent of Africa, and I'm just focusing here on the continent of Africa, but if we look at the continent of Africa and see all the gray on that map, again from the International Energy Agency, there are virtually no mandatory energy codes on the entire continent of Africa. So again, you know, 90 billion square meters of additional accommodation forecast in the next 40 years on a continent in which there is a huge shortage of built environment professionals and this weak policy backdrop. We asked a number of other questions about other policies, you know, national housing strategies and such like. And again, there were deficiencies noted in pretty much all of them. And when we asked on a more kind of general, from a general perspective, what our respondents, bear in mind these are institutes that are responding, what our respondents considered the biggest challenges to be in terms of built environment challenges, you'll see here that climate change was #1 on the list. Followed by, perhaps understandably, resilience to natural disaster. So this issue of vulnerability still very much at the fore. Rapid urbanization, urban sprawl, and affordable housing. I mean, there's a huge shortfall of affordable housing on the continent, which needs to be addressed. And because I know Chris is on the call, obviously traffic congestion and lack of public transport also high on the list. if we asked what the biggest challenges for the profession were, failure to develop and implement local plans. So many local authorities do have plans, but they don't have plans that get implemented. There's a big difference between compliance and delivery. Failure to enforce regulations. Again, many countries that have effective regulations, but they're simply not applied. And then moving into area that we're probably familiar with ourselves in terms of procurement methods and such like that don't deliver the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve. And maybe the last in that little list of red bullet points there, the impact of foreign consultants and contractors. So there's a perception in many of the countries that we speak to that foreign consultants are not always a benign force. Often they come forward with solutions which are not appropriate for the local context, transfer too much risk to the local practices, can't be built to the requisite standards by the local construction industry, etc. So, again, opportunities for us to help perhaps there too. And then finally, the biggest challenges facing education, just lack of capacity in the first instance. Poorly qualified and unqualified teaching staff. In many of the Commonwealth countries in which we work, a lot of teaching staff have very little experience of practice. They tend to kind of be recycled students, and they don't necessarily have the skills necessary to pass on to their students. And again, curriculum are outdated. There's still an awful lot of a legacy from the post-colonial era, particularly in planning, which has not been updated as it should be. And then there's a kind of this mismatch between what's being taught in the schools and what is actually required on the ground. In many cases, they're actually completely different things. So these were the three key findings of the survey. And as I say, they applied equally to all 4 disciplines. There's critical lack of capacity amongst built environment professionals in many of the countries that are urbanizing most rapidly and amongst the most vulnerable. And of course, as I've demonstrated through the issue with CO2 emissions, this may be a short-term, have a short-term impact on them, but it will have a long-term impact on us all. The lack of educational and institutional capacity to grow the profession fast enough to make up for this shortfall, and then the perceived weakness in built environment policy. So if we layer these things one upon the other, I'm sure you're perhaps picking up, there's a bit of a crisis ahead. And just to kind of verify our results in terms of what's actually happening on the ground, when we look at the results from the annual survey that's undertaken by the UN Sustainable Solutions Development Network, it's always a bit of a tongue twister, they said in 2019 that in Commonwealth countries, there were challenges in 10 countries, significant challenges in 13 countries, and major challenges in 12 countries. The one country that appears to have met the targets, by the way, is Brunei. And the significance here is if we then compare the results of the 2019 survey to the 2017 survey, we see that we're actually going backwards, because the situation here is unchanged in 23 countries, improving in only 2 countries, and actually getting worse in 10 countries. So, the capacity issues that I've described, are already having an impact insofar as urbanization is not achieving the desired impacts of making people's lives better. It's making them worse. So the question is, how do we move from this position of unplanned development, which I'm sure many of us will be familiar with these images. How do we move from that position of unplanned development past poorly planned development? This is actually an image of Oman in the Middle East, a country that I have done a lot of work in, where we can actually look back and see the impact of 40 years of rapid urbanization, because the Gulf urbanized in the late 70s, early 80s. So, 40 years ago, here we see, prolific urban sprawl, the unintended consequence of a land allocation policy, which gave each Omani adult a 600 square meter plot of land. And here we have a lunar landscape with no public transport, with very not with mixed development with high death rates because of road accidents, poor energy efficiency. We can't afford to repeat this in Africa and in Asia at the sort of scales that we're talking about. What we need, of course, is well-planned development. So the question is how we're going to achieve that. And I think what was probably the most apparent to us when we did the survey was that we're never going to achieve it on our own. So we as architects, planners, architects and surveyors, engineers and surveyors, it's simply going to be impossible for us to engage with these issues on the scale and with the speed required. So we need to work more collaboratively with others, and we need to develop more transformative approaches, more imaginative approaches to help those who are dealing with these issues. And that's why we came together as the 4 built environment disciplines with the Association of Commonwealth Universities, who have a network of 500 universities throughout the Commonwealth, with the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, whose members are obviously city mayors and city leaders, with now more recently the support of the government of Rwanda in its role as the incoming chair in office of the Commonwealth, and with support from the Prince's Foundation, to issue this call to action to Commonwealth heads of government to place sustainable urbanisation more centrally in Commonwealth policymaking, to help mobilise the Commonwealth, because we feel it's a great ecosystem, a great network, a great platform from which to engage with these challenges on a collective basis, so that we can develop solutions that are replicable and at scale. And so we've been promoting this call to action since it was published in February this year. We attended the World Urban Forum with the government of Rwanda earlier in the year. We've had great support from the Prince of Wales and from Baroness Scotland, the Commonwealth Secretary General. We've had great support from UN Habitat, the Executive Director. You'll see here a session we held in London with High Commissioners at the Canadian High Commission. We will be actually having an event tomorrow with His Royal Highness, at which we will be recording some footage to be shared in advance of COP and during COP around this topic. So we have a kind of theory of change. I don't know how readable this is, but we have a theory of change to kind of convey the spirit of what it is we're trying to do, which is to move from this position that we're currently in, to leverage the power of the Commonwealth to confront the challenges we're facing, to provide ultimately, better evidence-based policymaking, more effective intergovernmental relations, because a lot of local governments need to be empowered to do the things, to be given access to the finance to do the things they need to do, improve training of built environment professionals in order to achieve the outcomes that we're seeking. The next slide is probably completely illegible also, but it just shows a handful of initiatives that we're currently involved with, and I'll just quickly read through 1 or 2 of them. So we've been working with Ordnance Survey, the National Mapping Agency. In fact, I can just quickly flick onto that. And we've been working with Ordnance Survey, the UK's National Mapping Agency, to look at how we might quickly map cities that are suffering from large expanses of informal settlement, because at the moment, many of the cities that we're talking about, they have no base maps with which to manage this growth at all. And so working with the Ministry of Local Government in Zambia, using Ordnance Survey's advanced technology, machine learning, we've produced as a pilot a digital base map of Lusaka, which is over 400 square kilometers, mapping 300,000 individual dwellings in 3 weeks. And this now gives them the basis upon which to map their national census that they're about to rerun, to engage with their new national urbanisation policy that they're about to promote. And again, it's a solution which is replicable and scalable and can be sold throughout the Commonwealth and beyond as a starting point to help provide the kind of infrastructure that's necessary to engage with this issue of planning. The second initiative is working with Nesta Challengers. Some of you may be familiar with Nesta, to launch something called the Global Urban Planning Challenge. So we want to see we can't afford to wait to train the next generation of planners. We need to use digital tools. We need to use better data to enable city leaders to make more informed decisions, because more informed decisions are more likely to attract funding and to develop bankable projects. So we're talking about developing a global urban planning challenge with Nesta. We're working with C40 to take their experience from producing local climate action plans in some of the major cities and reformatting that knowledge and learning for use in secondary cities throughout the Commonwealth, and then disseminating that through the Association of Commonwealth Universities, because again, local climate action plans help to quantify the problem, help to identify prioritized projects, help to specify what's needed, help to create this pipeline of bankable projects, because there's no shortage of money out there. What there is a shortage of is bankable projects, and there's a shortage of bankable projects because there aren't enough people out there who know how to ask the right questions. We're working with the Indian Institute of Human Settlements in India, who are facing similar problems to the ones I've been describing, and have developed something called their Urban Practitioners Program. And the Urban Practitioners Program is a way of training people involved in the management of cities how to do so more effectively. So it's a jump start to produce a cadre of people that can engage with the complexity of city making at local city scale. And then other examples, for example, a survey of schools of architecture in the Commonwealth and such like, with a number of other projects kind of in hand. So that really is the work that we've been doing in terms of the survey, its findings, the call to action, which, as I say, is going forwards to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which will be held in Kigali in June next year, we hope. And that message will go to Commonwealth Heads of Government. And I just wanted to say that although I'm speaking here on behalf of the Commonwealth Association of Architects, of course, I am a member of the Royal Institute of Architects. And the Royal Institute of Architects is, of course, a member of the Commonwealth Association of Architects. And the work that I'm describing here is very consistent with the findings and the recommendations of the RIB Ethics and Sustainable Development Commission, which amongst its many recommendations were to place the public interest, social purpose, and sustainable development at the heart of its activities, and to develop a plan of action based on the UN 2030 agenda. But also with these 6 kind of key recommendations, the last of which, or the 5th of which rather, was to develop programs of activity to build international capacities to help drive sustainable development and ethics in practice. And, you know, if we remember that the RIBA now calls itself a global professional membership body, I'm hoping that you're going to be able to see potential for the Institute to engage more broadly with the challenges that I've outlined, because there are many people out there who need our help. And many of our members, of course, are in these same countries. And many of the schools that we validate are in these same countries, but we need to be doing more. And finally, in terms of some of the more that we're doing, when I was at the RIBA, we were kind of trying to grapple with these issues, and we recognized, as I've mentioned earlier, that we can't do this on our own. We need to do it together with our fellow built environment colleagues. And so we formed this group called the UK Built Environment Advisory Group, which is a collaboration between the RIBA, the RTPI, the iStructE, and the Landscape Institute. Note the fact that the ICE and the RICS are missing currently. But we formed this group, the intention of which was to engage much more strategically in the scale and nature of these challenges, to engage with foreign governments, to engage with our own Department for International Development, as it was then. And the first project that we picked up, because we're about practical action, was this program called the UK Global Future Cities program, which is a product of the Prosperity Fund, itself a product of the UK's National Security and Defence Strategy, which recognises that unplanned urbanisation is a strategic threat to the United Kingdom because of the potential for mass migration. And I mean, I think we probably all see evidence of that in our daily lives, unfortunately, on the news. And so this program is aimed at promoting prosperity amongst low-income countries. It involves 30 projects in 19 cities in 10 countries around the world. They're not all Commonwealth countries. They're Brazil, South Africa, Nigeria, Turkey, Myanmar, unfortunately now discounted, Thailand, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and Vietnam. And they're in 3 pillars, basically. Transportation. This, interestingly, is a picture of Lagos, which, again, Chris will probably recognize. This is their so-called public transport system. I mean, you know, it is a public transport system, but you're not going to get very far in that sort of traffic. And that has huge impacts on prosperity because people can't get around. They can't get to their employment, etc. Resilience. This is Yangon, which suffers from chronic flooding, as does Bangkok, as does Ho Chi Minh City, which are also part of this program. And then, of course, urban planning, where, as I said throughout this presentation, you know, we're grappling with this issue of informality and unplanned settlements. How do we deal with what we've already got, but how do we avoid more of it happening in future? Because it's an unstoppable force, this movement from urban to rural, or rural to urban. And just briefly, in the 3 years that we've been involved in this program, we've identified 6 key themes, which are affecting all of the cities that we're working in to a greater or lesser extent. And I think they're interesting themes because they're kind of somewhat upstream of the work which we as architects are traditionally involved with. But I think to some extent they illustrate some of the areas where we should be more involved in helping to frame, as I said before, the questions, and therefore to be able to evaluate the answers. So the 5 key areas that you see here are integrated and inclusive planning. There's still an awful gulf between those who understand the link between economic policy and spatial policy. Those who understand what integrated planning means. Much of the planning that goes on in many parts of the Commonwealth is still very much delivered in silos. And a lot of it is not participatory in the sense that, you know, it doesn't involve communities. Secondly, evidence-based design and the effective use of data. And there's a growing awareness of the importance of data to kind of to grapple with the nature and scale of the challenges we're facing, but there's a real lack of understanding about how to use that data effectively to deliver practical outcomes. So using data is key. Governance and collaboration. Again, you know, whether that's between central government and local government, or whether it's between departments within the government, or between local government and other stakeholders. You know, we all know, I'm sure, you know, we've all experienced the lack of collaboration that can exist here in the UK as much as anywhere. The 4th being project finance and procurement. And again, this goes back to the issue of bankable projects. You know, how do you put a business case together to secure funding from multilateral development bank or from your central treasury, and how do you procure those projects to make sure that you're actually getting the outcomes, not the outputs, but the outcomes that you're seeking to achieve, because that's what we're talking about here. And the 5th on this list, of course, is implementation and enforcement, monitoring and evaluation. In other words, once you've done everything above, and once you've sort of put the projects together, how do you make sure that they're actually delivering what everyone was hoping for? And how do you take corrective action? How do you know to take corrective action if they're not actually working as effectively as they might? And just very briefly to say the 6th theme, which isn't on this slide, but which has kind of emerged as a consequence of the work we've been doing, is leadership and change management. So, you know, city leadership, individual leadership, is key to dealing with any of these issues. And so the program that we've been working on through the UK Built Environment Advisory Group and UN Habitat with the FCDO has been to bring a whole range of British organisations, British Standards Institute, Building Research Establishment, Ordnance Survey, Met Office, Transport for London, the Behavioural Insights team from the Cabinet Office, the Treasury Infrastructure and Projects Authority, the Centre for Disaster Protection, which represents Lloyd's, a whole raft of organisations to share their expertise with the cities to help them engage with some of these themes and use the projects that we're working on as an entry point to the bigger challenges. So you'll be relieved to hear I'm going to end in a second. And I just wanted to end with this slide, really, because for me, as I say, it's kind of, it sums up the challenge that we're facing. The fact that in so many of the countries of the Commonwealth, and I'm only really using here the countries of the Commonwealth as a sort of an entry point to the rapidly urbanizing countries of the world, there is this elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is that there simply aren't enough built environment professionals out there to do what needs to be done and to ensure that we have a sustainable future. So as we kind of roll forwards into COP, this is the call to action is very much something that we will be promoting. I hope you'll see evidence of that in the media in the days ahead. I want to go back to the beginning of the session and to say how grateful I am to have the opportunity to present this work, and how sorry I am not to have been a more active member of the WCCA. But I do think the city and the city institutions have an enormous opportunity to contribute to this work. And I welcome your feedback and comments.
Hello, Peter. I don't know whether Chris has a comment. Can you hear me? This is Audrey.
I can hear you loud and clear, Audrey.
Yeah, I do. Sorry, I just
okay.
tried to type it in, but I just
yes
mistyped it. But I've heard some of your presentation before at the RIBA, and
sorry, Chris.
You're like a voice in the wilderness. You're the David Attenborough of this subject, and you speak so passionately about the Commonwealth and about the need for us to act together. I would really like to understand how we could best help, because obviously the Company of Architects have lots of CPDs which we could make available for free for a global audience, but whether we could pass on some of our thinking to the colleagues in the Commonwealth. I don't know what the best way of taking this forward is, because the UK and London in particular as a global has got a great opportunity to help, but how we best take it forward.
Yeah. Well, it's a very good question, but I mean, I think there are lots of ways. Maybe this isn't the time to discuss them in detail, but I think, whether it be, as you say, from on the one hand, CPD, which is a relatively easy way of making a difference, to a slightly more substantive, engagement with the city institutions that we're so close to. I think there are many different ways in which we could help, and again, also persuading and encouraging some of the other built environment institutes to perhaps engage a little bit more effectively in this kind of I won't say mission, but in this work. But I'd very much welcome an opportunity to have that conversation with the WCCA at some point if it was appropriate.
I think we've also got access to the banks as well.
Exactly.
So I think if we've got so many city institutions that if we can get on board, it would be a real galvanizing thing to do.
Yeah.
May I jump in?
Yeah,
may I jump in? Yes. The thing is, I've been pondering on what to say and how to say it. Peter, within the Commonwealth, there are groups of architects and groups of built environment people who have been sidelined. And so you find that there's a very high degree of private investment going on. And the sad thing is persuading the governments that be to allow the local architects and the local built environment professionals to come in. And now this is just one example I'm going to give. There are more issues, but Chris Dyson is not on the project, and neither is Michelle, because they would have witnessed a robust discussion that I was having with Yasmin when we were at Deal, when Valerie was holding her master's weekend. Now that discussion galvanized, went on to a member of the RIBA being given 111 hospitals. Which architect on earth gets 111 hospitals to set up as a prototype? This is only one example. I don't want to make it political, but I would hope that the CAA and the WCCA would encourage the leaders of the Commonwealth countries to let their members have an equal stake. Because if you look at Ghana, if you look at Nigeria, they are very, very big developments, and many of these are privately owned developments, very high specifications and so on. And so there's a bubble. For example, a country like Ghana had a very robust planning, very robust architectural schools, and they turn out the architects. Now, if a leader, and this is a very progressive leader, is going to award 111 hospital prototypes and a huge cathedral to a member of the RIB, don't forget about his color. These things are there. Against what the local architects have tried to say, that make it an open competition. These are state projects.
Yeah.
If it's a personal project like a Chief's Palace, or which there were some of those, you can give it to him if you want.
Yeah.
But if it's a state project and national, there are so many, I could read of about 10 or more.
Yeah.
So, and the Ghanaian Institute of Architects tried to mount a campaign. They went about it very gently, very professionally. They went through procurement and they were just pushed away.
Yeah. And
my point is, this is a leader who is a very progressive leader.
Yeah.
But how can you do that? You break the architects' hearts. So if you look at Ghana, Transaco Housing and Regimanal Housing and other large projects which are going on, Petroleum City and so many other projects are going on. But the built environment professionals are going into private enterprise. Unfortunately, the government and the state enterprises, the state projects are not being delivered. I mean, I don't know what to say. Heavens, I don't know what to say.
I mean, I recognize everything you're saying, Audrey.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back again to some of Chris's comments, about what can we do to help? And many of these institutes, of course, because of the low membership numbers, are not strong, so they don't have a strong voice. They don't have necessarily the relationship with governments that we have here in the UK, and God knows, our voice isn't that strong either. I'm just looking at the survey, actually findings for Ghana, and I think there's 330 architects in Ghana or thereabouts. It's not a large number. So I think, we can help by lending our voice to support them in these discussions if they think it's appropriate.
They do think it's appropriate. I know very well that particular case, they felt very strongly.
Yeah.
And I think there were movements to write to the RIBA. Yeah. But Ghanaians are brought up to be very quiet and very respectful and not to speak out. So that, again, it's a problem. I mean, you would have found that out. Yeah. Had it happened in Nigeria, that'd been a totally different situation. Yeah. But Ghanaians are not feisty, so they would go about it in a very calm way. But my point is that if you extrapolate this, words fail me. I don't know what to say, frankly. Yeah,
I agree. And you'll have seen the comment in the survey about the impact of foreign consultants working in some of these countries. It's not always as beneficial as we might like to imagine it is. Although I think, in fairness, and I know this conversation is being recorded, that some of those references was to the impact of China in Africa in particular, which
yes, but Peter, don't forget, for countries like Ghana and Nigeria and so on, there have been lots of foreign consultants working there peacefully, happily, and they are welcomed. Now, this particular issue of the 111 hospitals and cathedral and so on is from a Black person, a Black architect. So, it would be difficult, I suppose, for somebody to look at it and realize what's going on. But he's not Ghanaian. Forget about the color. The thing is, you can't award one architect 111 hospitals prototypes and a huge cathedral and a huge seafront development, all within a very short space of time. No architect in the world gets that. Who gets that? You know, so it's a difficult issue to broach. Yes.
I hear what you're saying. And I see Valerie here and has turned her camera on. Hi, Valerie. You're on mute, Valerie.
Yes, hello there. Lovely to see you again, Peter, and to listen to the lecture. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
Interesting. I guess one simple thing, actually, just in response to what Audrey was just saying, was maybe always to do this sort of presentation two up. You know, it would kind of be more powerful, I guess, if there was a, you know, I don't know, an architect from, well, Ghana or it doesn't matter where it is almost, does it? It makes the message that much more.
Yes.
And it's kind of easier to do when we're working remotely and on Zoom and so on.
Yeah.
Around the world.
Good.
It's just an observation.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't know whether anybody else has any questions. Phil, I see you looking on and shaking your head occasionally.
Can I make one more observation, which is that, you know, the graphs and the data is very compelling, and all of us on this call obviously understand that with better construction, better urban planning, implementation all round, that will deliver sustainable benefits. But that wasn't captured in the way that I was expecting, if I'm being candid.
No, go ahead.
The presentation, and not least because the environmental and social benefits that would arise would be, you know, hugely beneficial to, you know, each individual state. I don't know whether you've tried to do that, but maybe just even to do one or two case studies.
Yeah, no,
the kind of benefits that might arise across the triple bottom line, because the ones are kind of self-evident, but actually there's a very compelling message around the social and environmental benefits, which I think would really help deliver the message. And particularly,
no, thank you.
So many of the African states, and indeed elsewhere, many of the Commonwealth countries are, you know, the smaller ones are low-lying, they're feeling the impacts of climate change, and that would be a wonderful lever. That's a wrong expression, but a great lever to help deliver the change that we're seeking in terms of improvements all round.
Exactly. And I think you're absolutely right insofar as the issue has to be contextualized in each country, and it means different things to different people, but the outcome ultimately is the same, which is that, you know, if we don't have sustainable urbanization, that there will be a price to pay. And unfortunately, the scale we're talking about, we're all going to pay the price at some point if we don't sort it out. So I'm conscious of the time, and I just wondered if there were any other observations or comments. Very good of you to actually.
Well, if there are no more questions, I think I'd just like to say thank you, Peter, very much for your time. It's really fascinating. And,
thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
good night, everyone.
Cheerio, Audrey.
Good night. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Cheryl.
Thanks for doing it.
Thanks, Chris. Bye.
Good night, everyone. Enjoy your evenings.
Yeah, cheers, Cheryl.